Electrons are not the only subatomic particles present in an atom. Today we know that an atom consists of a nucleus having protons and neutrons, while the electrons revolve around the nucleus in discrete energy levels. We have discussed the discovery and the properties of electrons in the previous sessions. You can find the links on top here. Today we're going to discuss the discovery of proton. So let's begin. Protons were discovered in 1886 through the same cathode ray tube experiment as was performed by J.J. Thomson for the discovery of electrons. This experiment was performed by Goldstein, a German physicist. So what he did was that he took a glass tube, that is the discharge tube, having two metallic plates, the two electrodes connected to the positive and the negative terminals of the battery. The tube was again filled with a gas and it was evacuated so that the pressure inside is very low. The electrodes were connected to a battery with a very high voltage, that is about 10,000 volts. And at this low pressure, we already know from the discovery of cathode rays or electrons that certain rays are emitted from the cathode that move towards the anode. And from that, of course, the negatively charged particles were discovered. Now, Goldstein observed that when we have a gas at a very low pressure inside this cathode ray tube, the rays that are emitted from the cathode, they strike the gas molecules and ionize them. So the neutral gas molecules are converted into ions, and these are converted into positive ions. Now, how does these cathode rays, which are traveling towards the anode, convert neutral gas molecules into ions? So this is what happens. We have neutral molecules which are struck by the particles emitting from the cathode, and so they eject an electron out of the neutral gas molecules. And we already know that atoms are neutral, so if they have electrons which are negatively charged, they must have the same number of positively charged species to make it a neutral species, right? So atoms are neutral. We already know, we have discussed the discovery of electrons, so we know that an atom contains a negatively charged particle. But if we look at the atom as a whole, it is neutral, which also means that if there are negative particles, there must be, or there is a negative charge on the atom, there must be the same number of positive charges to neutralize those negative charges. So if there is an imbalance between the positive and the negative charges, then the atom will get a charge, whether a positive charge or a negative charge. So if the number of negative charges increase inside the atom gets negatively charged and we have a negative ion created as a result. But if the number of positive charges increase as compared to the negative charges, then of course the atom will be positively charged and we will have a positive ion created as a result. So what happens during this experiment is that these negative rays emitting from cathode, when they strike the neutral gas molecules, they eject an electron out of the atom of these gases. So when you eject an electron out of the gas molecule, what happens is that the atom now has imbalanced positive and negative charges. So you have ejected a negative charge or an electron out of an atom, which means that now it will have more number of positive charges than the negative charge, and so obviously it will get a positive charge. So these neutral molecules are converted into cations with the ejection of this one electron. We can use different types of gases, like for example, helium gas can be used, neon gas can be used in this discharge tube experiment, or you can also use hydrogen gas. So we can use all of these different gases and convert them into positive ions. Now, when these neutral gas molecules or atoms are converted into positive ions, they obviously will have to move towards the negative electrode, that is the cathode. Now, this cathode, which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery, will attract the positive ions towards itself, and the cathode is perforated. So, this cathode has holes inside it through which these positive ions can penetrate and strike the wall of the discharge tube. This wall is plated with a fluorescent material, that is zinc sulfide, and so when these positive ions strike the zinc sulfide coated wall, it glows or fluorescence is observed as a result, which again moves that the particles that are striking the zinc sulfide coated wall are actually charged particles. So they travel away from the anode towards the cathode with a particular velocity, and they are penetrating this cathode because the cathode itself is perforated. These holes were called canals, and that is why these rays or particles were also called later on as the canal rays. So we also call it the canal ray experiment. And later on, these positive rays were then called protons by Rutherford. Just like electrons or the negative rays or the cathode rays, these positively charged rays or particles, they also have certain properties which were discussed after the experiment was performed. So it was seen that they travel in a straight line towards the cathode away from the anode. If you place an electric field or magnetic field, obviously the path of these positive ions or rays will be affected by electrical or magnetic fields because they are moving charged particles. Just like electrons, these positively charged particles also will have a charge to mass ratio. Now remember that these positive charges are actually produced from the gas molecules, and each gas has a combination of atoms with different atomic mass. So the charge to mass ratio, the charge is +1 on all these particles, but the mass can be different. So the charge to mass ratio is dependent upon the nature of the gas that you are using. Like helium has a different atomic mass, neon has a different atomic mass, hydrogen has a different atomic mass. So for all these different gases, the charge to mass ratio will be different, but it will be maximum for hydrogen. The charge to mass ratio is maximum for, or the highest for, the hydrogen atom or the ions produced from the hydrogen atom. It is because of the fact that the atomic mass of hydrogen, that is protium, is 1. So 1 by 1 is equal to 1. And any other gas has a higher mass than hydrogen. So if you divide 1 by anything higher than 1, that will be less than 1. So charge to mass ratio for hydrogen is exactly 1. The name proton was later on coined by Rutherford because of the fact that when you use hydrogen as the gas inside this discharge tube, hydrogen, has an atom that has a nucleus having only a single proton, and it does not have any neutron, and it also have a single electron revolving around the nucleus. So it has one proton and one electron. This electron, when ejected out of this neutral hydrogen atom, leaves behind only proton inside the nucleus. And this proton, of course, will be positively charged because these two charges cancel out each other and make hydrogen atom a neutral atom. But when you eject an electron out of the system, out of this atom, only proton is left behind. And when hydrogen was used as a gas inside this experiment, it still made this zinc sulfide coating glow. It meant that these particles produced from hydrogen molecule, they are positively charged because they move towards the cathode, and because they also produce fluorescence on the zinc sulfide plate. It means they are charged particles, they have a positive charge, and the only thing that will have a positive charge inside this ionized hydrogen atom will be a proton, which was then later on suggested by Rutherford. The mass of an atom is concentrated inside the nucleus, which means that electrons does not really contribute to the mass of an atom. So the whole mass is concentrated inside the nucleus in shape of protons and neutrons, and that is why we say that protons are heavier than electrons. So the mass of a proton is 1837 times greater than that of electrons. So proton is heavier than an electron. So any positive material, any positive ion in the world can never be lighter than a proton. Proton is the lightest positive species in the world. So this is how protons were discovered by Goldstein through the cathode ray tube experiment. In the upcoming session, we'll talk about the discovery of another subatomic particle, that is neutrons. So stay tuned till the next session. Thank you so much for now.